I doubt that there is anyone in this room who, if you were asked, wouldn't acknowledge the importance of an inclusive workplace. But the really bigger question is exactly what are you doing to achieve that? Is it embedded in every level of your company's operations, and is it making a quantifiable impact on your organisation? In this session, we're going to have a look at what a fully inclusive workplace does look like, and we'll explore what some businesses are doing to embrace diversity and what that's doing in terms of bringing benefits to the organisation. Now, before I introduce the panel for the session, if I can ask Shelley Rees to give an acknowledgement of country.
Sure. I'm Shelley Rees. I'm a Jitterbal woman from the Atherton Tablelands in northern Queensland. And so, because I don't come from here, allow me to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we meet on today, and on behalf of the panel and all of you also, acknowledging the traditional owners of those who have come before us and who have a very active life in this region today. Thank you, Ali.
Thank you. Now I'm going to ask the panel to actually introduce themselves for this session and give a little bit of context about why they're here. And I should note at this point that unfortunately Adam Goodes, who was meant to join us, had another pressing issue. So we do have the Deputy Chair of the Go Foundation, Michael O'Loughlin, with us, who has taken Adam Goodes' place. So why don't I start with you, Michael, just a little brief introduction to who you are.
Hi guys, Michael O'Loughlin. I'm a Narungga Nurrunjeri Kaurna man from South Australia. Co-chair of the Go Foundation, an ex-has-been footballer.
Shirley Chowdhury, I'm the Chief Executive of the Go Foundation, previously a lawyer, and very privileged to be at Go.
And Jill Hannaford, my day job is working at GHD, the engineering firm. I'm a non-engineer who has a strong focus on diversity and inclusion there, and I'm a corporate partner with the Go Foundation and also a non-executive director on Bridge Housing.
I'm a partner of KPMG. I'm also the CEO of Arilla Indigenous Consulting. We're known as one of the first organisations, or the first organisation, to involve the corporate sector in the Indigenous space 26 years ago.
And I should remind you to get your questions through on the app. But Jill, if I can start with you, are a lot of companies thinking that they're doing the right thing on diversity and inclusion, and in fact thinking that they're ticking all the boxes, but when it actually comes to embedded work practices, they're falling short?
Yeah, look, I think for many years there was a lot of rhetoric. I think in the last few years I've seen a real change in good practice. I think from an Indigenous engagement perspective and representing Indigenous people in Australia in corporates, we really are seeing a change, and working with organisations like Go and with Shelley's organisation Arilla, doing a lot around Indigenous cultural awareness in corporates, and looking at practical ways for organisations and executives and boards to really engage and get a greater understanding of diversity issues from an Indigenous perspective is really changing.
Shelley, why does it matter?
Oh, that's such a big question. There's so many answers to that. I think that most people, particularly the corporate sector, has seen Indigenous issues as being a feel-good exercise and perhaps something that's limited to the HR department if we're thinking about recruitment. I think the more modern and contemporary view and what I call the fresh business case is thinking about how getting involved in the Indigenous space can affect your bottom line in a positive way and also help the organisation do what it does best. So, for example, the old idea about having a diverse workforce is still a very valid one, but I think the fresher conversation has been the fact that most organisations are involved in the Indigenous space in one shape or another across all major sectors across Australia. And so, therefore, if you're not involved in the Indigenous space yourself as an organisation, there's a good chance that your competitors are. So it makes good business sense to stay in step with your competitors. We're also seeing a lot of data that shows that customers, major partners, shareholders are expecting medium to large size corporations to be involved in this space as well, and not just dancing on the periphery, but really getting involved and making a difference in a tangible way.
And that, Shirley, can I ask you that tangible difference, is it quantifiable?
No, look, I think one of the things that Go does, a little different to some of the other types of scholarship organisations, is we see one of our biggest roles as working with our corporate partners in the Go ecosystem, partners like GHD, through people like Shelley, helping embed those practices in the organisation. So we're not just talking about a tick-the-box exercise and hitting 3% Indigenous employment or 3% Indigenous procurement. It's much more deeply embedded, and it starts in the boardroom, and it's why this conversation today is so important, but it's not just a document you pull out twice a year. It's not just a tick-the-box exercise. It's much more tangible.
Michael, do you think generally businesses get that? I mean, Shelley was just talking about the fact that we've had the diversity conversation for a long time now. Do you think that significant inroads really have been made?
Yeah, I think so. As a business owner, as myself, and Adam Goods is a business owner. So after playing our playing careers, we both own and operate our own businesses. I think a lot of the time when I got to Sydney as a 17-year-old, from Adelaide to kick a football around, a lot of my teammates had never met an Aboriginal person before. So to have those conversations in the locker room and out in the field, for us to get better, to win games, they needed me to get upskilled, which means I had to get fitter, had to get stronger, so we can play a game of football to win games, to be successful, to win premierships. So that was really drummed home, I guess, early for me. And the foundation, what we're trying to do, all the lessons that I've learnt to take into sitting on a boardroom, I have really learnt a lot from sport. Hard work, dedication. If you want something, you've got to roll your sleeves up and you've got to get to work. And you've got to be the first one in, the last one to leave. I've been really lucky enough to have and form great relationships with a lot of our board members. They're a little bit like my team, and I can see a couple here. I'm not too sure where you'd get a game on the field, Ken, but you're an integral part of the board. We all play a role, and I don't know everything, but I think the way that we've been able to structure our board, and I've been able to learn, and the way Adam Goods has been able to learn, has been a credit to our board, and I think we've been smart enough to recognise the people that we've formed relationships with that can be a part of that. And Shirley mentioned about our ecosystem and having our partners on there. And we've known Jill for a little while now, but I've learnt so much already. So we've taken bits and pieces of everyone, and I think being able to execute that in the boardroom, and again, I'm still learning, and so is Adam, and finding out, okay, this is how you do things to be successful. I've learnt so much over that journey.
Now, there's no question about the role of the board in trying to drive change, but I guess, Shelley, the question is there goodwill? You talk about boards walking on eggshells. What exactly do you mean?
I have this theory that when you put the term Indigenous, reconciliation, Torres Strait Islander, First Nations, all of those terms on top of something, that really good-meaning people, particularly leaders, start to walk on eggshells. I think they're afraid of saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing, making a mistake, sounding racist. I can't use that word. I don't want to offend Michael, on and on and on. And it stops them from being their best and doing their best. So the way that I describe my work is that we remove the eggshells by giving skills and confidence. And I think that's really, really important. And what leaders tell us is that they want to know things like, how do I lead effective teams? How do I articulate why we're involved in this space to our shareholders, our stakeholders, our partners, etc., and to our teams? And they want to know things like, such as this morning, what is a welcome to country? What is an acknowledgement of country? What's the difference? How do I say that? What is the wrong thing to say? What's the right thing to say? I know that sounds very basic to many of you, but the fact is that it's the number one thing that leaders come to us about, boards, executives, CEOs and so on. And at the same time too, they're wanting to know what's the hot topics in the Indigenous space. So before they walk into that RAP committee meeting or the BCA Indigenous Task Force meeting or whatever, they want to know what are the hot topics, so I've got some conversation starters. We actually have a digital cultural competency training product, and wrapped around that is a communique that we provide once a month called the Arilla Circle. It was always intended to just be information on a monthly basis as time goes on in this space, but what we didn't anticipate is that leaders would end up using it as a back pocket brief before they go into those meeting rooms. So, and I find it interesting too that, particularly in the last 5 years, that more CEOs are seeing a very clear leadership role in this space, as opposed to, you know, in the past we might see it being driven by, largely driven by corporate citizenship and so on. We're seeing CEOs taking an active individual leadership role, and as a result of that, that's affecting their brand and reputation in a positive way. And as a result of that, we're seeing more people within corporations seeing that Indigenous skills is the new leadership skill to have.
And yet you paint that picture, and Jill, can I ask you, even though all of that is happening, which is great progress, we still have the eggshells. Why the eggshells? Why are people so very uncomfortable about this?
Look, I don't really know. I don't really understand why the eggshells, because the people who are on eggshells are the ones who think they're curious, wanting to know what's going on in the world and are keen to ask questions, but yet they don't. So, you know, the fundamental thing that I've learned over the years is that there's no question that's a stupid question, and that Indigenous Australians would much rather answer the question than have the ignorance. So I encourage our board and every board that I'm associated with to be curious, invite members of the RAP Advisory Committee into your board meetings, have presentations from your Indigenous staff, talk to your customers and stakeholders who have some knowledge in this background or in this area, and really get a better understanding, because I think that understanding piece is so important. And then from the other side, I think learning the sorts of things that you might stereotype Indigenous people in Australia into being or doing, it's really important to think of other things. So one of the things we do with Go is we get their high school scholars into work with our scientists and engineers to think about a career in STEM. So why when you want to, as a young Indigenous person, give back to your community, would you only think of law or health as a career option? Why not think of STEM? So why not be Australia's next chief scientist? Why not think about how the roads are built or how the waste is managed? So I think it's, and those opportunities provide us with a way to educate both our employees, but also the young people that we're influencing.
So, Shirley, what does a truly inclusive workplace look like? Would one walk in the door and be immediately aware that that's what it is?
Can I respond to something Jill said first before I answer your question, Ali? I think something that Jill's just raised is really important for Go. We see that the work that we do with our corporates in our ecosystem as being mutually beneficial. So that STEM day that Jill's referring to, our students went and spent a morning with GHD's engineers and other employees. And at the end of that day, one of our students said, you know, I walk down the road every day, but I never realised everything that went into designing a road and designing a bridge and clean water projects. And on the other side, I think Jill would agree that we're breaking down those barriers. So her staff, and GHD, out of all our organisations, is probably one of the most evolved in this space. But their staff came out of it understanding more about that Indigenous perspective. So it's very much a mutual thing, and that's something that I think we learnt from Adam and Michael. Sorry, can you repeat your question, Ali?
What does a truly inclusive workplace look like? I mean, do you know it when you walk in the door?
I think it looks like different things for different organisations, and it's not up to us at Go to dictate what your inclusive workplace looks like. I think for Go, and Michael can talk to this much better than I can, but Adam and Michael wanted to create a place where we were led by an Indigenous voice. And we're led by an Indigenous voice in the boardroom. We've got Adam, Michael and Sonia Stewart, who's a proud Bundjalung woman, and is here somewhere, I think. We've got our patron, Linda Burney, who's Indigenous, who leads us in a very different way. We've got our students and our families. We've got their parents, and we've got our Indigenous partners at our organisations. And we are led all the time by an Indigenous voice.
But that is as it should be, because you're a particular organisation. But I'm talking more about the organisations you work with, the GHDs, the people, the companies that the people in this room represent. What does a fully inclusive workplace look like in that context?
I think it comes from creating, and I'm not trying to be high level here, but I think it comes from creating a workplace where everybody can take their authentic selves to work every day. So if I look at our organisations that we work with are all at different points of that journey. Some, like GHD, have inclusivity and diversity embedded in everything they do, from their hiring practices to the holidays they celebrate at the office, to the wrap document they have, to having an LGBTIQ community within the workplace, to having an Indigenous brothers and sisters group. It is creating a space where we can all be ourselves and we don't have to hide any part of who we are when we go to work. And I think you do know it when you walk through the door. You do feel a sense that people aren't saying things or making jokes or making offhand comments that suggest that you are on the outer. People are thinking about how to be inclusive all the time. And I think and I can only talk about what Go does with organisations, but from our perspective, it's ensuring that that wrap document doesn't sit in the bottom drawer and come out during Reconciliation Week and NAIDOC Week. It is something that it's constant. I don't know, do you have
Give me some examples of good inclusive practices.
It's a good question. We always hear the mad, bad and sad of Aboriginal people, always. And then if I ask the audience here, they could probably name a few of those mad, bad stories. What we need are great role models, people that are doing some really good things out there in the workforce. It started with sport. Sport's been a great vehicle for our people to talk about education, to talk about employment, to talk about health. Sport's been great. But we need to take another step. And I don't mean to embarrass Shelley here, but she is an absolute superstar in our community. She's been doing great things for a number of years. And these are the examples that we need to keep on talking about. And we talk about inclusiveness and whatnot, but she is now a huge part of the KPMG team and has been for a while, and her business has gone from strength to strength. As I said, if I asked the audience if they could name me some great stories and role models, not the ones you see on television, but some ones that don't automatically spring to mind. But for me, those are the examples that are great. And we take our Go Foundation. Recently, 2 weeks ago, we took it back to Adelaide, to my old primary school and high school. We launched almost 70 scholarships, and I wanted to give those kids not just the Michael O'Loughlin kicking a football on television story. It was about taking us back to go, okay, you can become a lawyer, become a Dr. Allen, you can become a police officer. So these examples are very, very important in our communities because it shows the young fella, the young girl, that you can be inclusive. I didn't know that I was Aboriginal until I went to school, because it was just normal. And then someone said, oh, you're black and you're poor. And I was like, oh, really? I had no idea. I just thought that was life. I thought everyone rolled like that. But it wasn't the case. So that was a really early lesson for me, that I go, oh, okay, there are people that are out there doing different things. So for me, and both, I'm speaking on Adam Goods' behalf, I always do, we wanted to do something different. I mentioned about the lessons that I learnt about playing professional sport, and I was very lucky to do that. As I said, I was blessed with DNA from my mother and my father, but I had done nothing to earn that DNA. I was just lucky. I had to make it up myself in terms of working hard. As I said, first one in, last one to leave, and get yourself to and from training. So these things I learnt, I wanted to take into owning a business. The first person in my whole family to do that. To forming relationships, to starting a foundation, to give other people the opportunity to do that. And we talk about walking past these big buildings in Pitt Street and George Street. I was petrified when I got to Sydney. Absolutely not. I thought, you know, going to the 20th floor, the 30th floor, there's monsters live in those floors. Well, there probably is a couple, but but you know where I'm going. So I made a really conscious decision that once football finished, I was going to be prepared, I was going to be a business owner, and I was going to help others achieve their dream. And that takes a lot of work. It takes time. It takes sacrifice. It takes not only from the broad Australia community, but my own community, who think some really negative things have been said about myself and Adam because we may have lost touch with our community, but that was always our core responsibility in our thought process. We wanted to create these opportunities for others. So I think the burning desire, and certainly within our communities, we've always tried to do that. As I mentioned before, I'm very lucky that I have a great, diverse board that both Adam and I have learnt so much of, and it's been the strength of our foundation, and I put that my hand on my heart and say that. But it takes a lot of work. It does.
Ali, can I come back to your question just for a second, because I want to make sure that we nail exactly what your question was. I think you asked for specific examples of what
Well, I was actually going to ask Jill, because I think GHD is walking the talk. And you talked before about bringing in some of the school leavers. That's one example. What else happens in your organisation?
Yeah, so look, I mean, from a very broad diversity focus, we set up a structure a number of years ago, like many organisations who are represented here today, and focused on some strategic pillars, so some key things that we wanted to address. And we knew we couldn't do everything, and we weren't going to sort of do bits of things. So we set up those strategic pillars, we had a plan, and we implemented and actioned it, and we've achieved a number of targets that we set, and we're making good progress. So, you know, in the gender space, 44% of our board is female.
And you set a numerical target?
Yes, a 40% target.
So it was a quota in your
target? Not a quota.
What's the difference in terms of an internal
So target being aspirational, quota being something that the board would mandate, so a subtle difference, I guess. We made a very strong push to get 40% females on our Australian leadership team, of which I'm one. We have fantastic flexible work practices. We have a career relaunch program for men and women who are coming back into the workforce after being looking after children primarily and being out of the workforce. So there's a whole range of activities and initiatives that we've taken. We've partnered with organisations, and I think this is fundamental. So there was no way that we as an organisation could make the difference ourselves. And I hear stories of organisations setting up Indigenous scholarships, for example, or, you know, going to universities themselves and making contact with Indigenous units and trying to get talent in the door that way. For us, the partnering with organisations like Go, like Career Trackers, has just made incredible sense, because the scaffolding, the structure is there, and we're able to really be true partners to achieve some of those things that we want to achieve and have to achieve from a business imperative perspective. And
you very much just broaden the conversation beyond Indigenous inclusion too, because it is it's relevant to the broader issue, which goes to my first question from the floor. One of the elephants in the room about diversity is that to achieve it on boards, present board directors, usually of a certain demographic and type, I didn't write this, have to give over their power to others different to them. How can we achieve this if we don't impose legislation and or quotas? Shall I?
I don't really understand the question.
Basically what they're saying is that for want of a better description, and whoever asked the question, feel free to correct me, but male, pale and stale, we're used to a particular type of board director, and many of those particular types of board directors, they might be female, older and stale, I don't know, may have to move over to make way. So how do we get that change? In other words, how do we encourage people to open up that conversation, even when it may mean that they no longer hold their position?
I don't think that's for us to determine nor to dictate, really. I think a mature board is one that has honest and big conversations about who they are, what they want to achieve, celebrating what makes them great, but talking about also what they need to do in the future that aligns with their aspirations and their visions.
And what about quotas then? And that's part of this question as well. And Jill, it was really interesting that you talked about the aspirational versus the mandated. Does that mean that these targets that you set was not attached to KPIs? So no one was going to be losing out if you didn't achieve them?
Yes, that's correct.
Right, and you still got there? So are we fans of quotas? Are we...
One of the popular tools that most of these organisations that we're talking about use, including GHT with Jill, is reconciliation action plans. So that, or RAPs as they're better known, there's over 1,000 of them in existence today. They are strategic documents that outline how an organisation is going to achieve its goals, many of which, the things that Jill just spoke of, fall out of. So quotas, Indigenous procurement, employment, partnerships with local communities and so on. There's different levels of a RAP as well. The highest level of RAP is an Elevate RAP, and that indicates that it's an organisation that's been doing this for some time, who's particularly brave and exceptionally innovative and doing things completely out of the box, different to anyone else. And what we usually see out of Elevate wrappers, as we call them, are specific targets or quotas, but targets is more common, and to help drive change and again that innovation. And many of them believe that if they didn't have those within a structure, not just a standalone commitment, that it probably wouldn't be successful.
Shirley, there's a question here about diversity of thinking, often overlooked aspect of diversity and inclusion. What are the views of the panel on the value of this, and how do you ensure such diversity is part of an organisation? I mean, we've often heard about that group think. So how do you ensure that the diversity voice continues to be heard?
Well, I can only talk from my own experience. I'm Deputy Chair of the YMCA as well as being CEO of Go. And I think it comes from, the starting point has to be, as Shelley was saying, a diverse group of people around the table. And it's not just diversity of culture, diversity of education, diversity of background and where you were raised and how you were raised and how you came to have a seat at that table. But it's also, we have really robust conversations in our boardroom. I think, there are times that our conversations take us to really uncomfortable places. And uncomfortable because we all come with very different perspectives. But it's about, for us, it's about having a high level of respect in that boardroom and being open to all of those views. And as I said, it starts with the people around the table, but then just that total openness to the diversity of thinking. And it's the first step, I think.
Jill, there's a tough question here. It's not for me to start editing these questions, so I'm going to give it to you and you can do as you wish with it. GHD has previously worked with Adani on a project that's currently forcing Indigenous communities off their land. Why didn't inclusivity prevent this, or is it just intended to buy social licence to cover for unethical projects?
Look, I haven't worked on that project, so I don't know the full detail.
But what about the
second part? What I would say was, the role that we would play in that is as an advisor to an organisation like that. And the second part of the question, I think over time we are really seeing many corporates and many organisations doing a much better job in terms of how they do the Indigenous engagement and work with Indigenous communities. Shelley spoke at an Indigenous engagement conference for us last year, and the room was full because in previous years people haven't known what or how to do engagement with Indigenous communities. They've walked on eggshells, they haven't wanted to upset, and it's led to really bad practices in many cases. So I think the education piece, the continual increased knowledge from traditional owners on how to navigate their way through corporate Australia and through government regulations is really important to affecting change over time.
But it has to be, Shelley, doesn't it? It has to be, we started the whole conversation talking about just box ticking and not actually doing it, but it has to be more than just gosh, this is going to make us look good.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. We have a term...
But do you still get a bit of that?
Oh, all the time, every day. And in fact, I have a term I probably can't repeat in public that we use in my office. Alan Fink used the term, you know, you've got to smell a rat. So I'll use that term instead. But I always say to the team, just put your radar on high, constantly to see if you're smelling a rat. And if we feel as though someone wants to work with us because they want to look good or they're just trying to tick a box, then we decline the relationship and wish them well. And that's because there are too many other people across Australia and too many corporations who are in this for the right reason, who are making an impact, and they're doing so in the right way. And they're the kind of organisations that we work with, and not necessarily advanced in their journey. I mean, we're around to help them advance in their journey, but they could be right at the beginning stages. But it's having an ethical backbone behind it, because we like to think we work with strong ethics. And so if the purpose fits, then we know that it's a relationship that's going to work well. But you do have to have that on your radar all the time.
Backbone is a really good way of putting it. Another question here. I'm a female, so it's wonderful to see the opportunities now available. However, I do worry that there is a younger generation of men who feel disenfranchised. What should organisations be doing to educate male talent and stop them from becoming anti-feminist, which seems to be becoming a trend?
Michael, you're good at this.
Oh.
Hey, Michael, there's another question for you while you think about that. You might find this one easier. Should Ashley Sampi have received a free kick in the last 30 seconds of the 2005 Grand Final?
Someone from Perth here, obviously.
Well, you can give us a quick yes, no. That is the top-rated question at the moment, so clearly there's demand.
No, I hate the West Coast Eagles.
Right, okay.
No, they're an outstanding team. They have been for a long time. The first question, at the foundation, we've had a real emphasis on having more young ladies in our program. We're trying to get to about 60%. Shirley, I think we've all come to that conclusion that in a lot of our communities, my mother's community, my father's community, a lot of our young girls get left behind. It's always been about the boys and the football, and the girls go and cook the barbecue and the canteen, and it's not good enough. I'm raised by a single mum. Adam's raised by a single mum. My grandmother played a huge part of my upbringing. And it was one of the things that we wanted to make sure that we were looking after our younger generation, and in particular the female side of the foundation. We wanted them to be upskilled and have great careers. And for too long I'd seen in our communities about a young lady who partner up with a young man and get pregnant, and that was it. And it was really sad, and we're trying to change that slowly but surely. And it's all about opportunity and presenting things. I didn't know you can kick a football and make a living out of it until I saw someone on television do it. And I said, I would like to do that. And Mum goes, you can get paid to do that. And I went, what, really? I'm really good at doing that. And the same applies for the foundation. We need to create great examples like Shelley and
But what
Jill
about the issue of disenfranchising those that are there?
Oh, it's education. It's like anything. It's about the racism that's happening in the world of sport, and one of the recent ones with Eddie Betts recently. We've got to keep on fighting the good fight, and that's education, 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 and that's what we're doing with our I guess, young men in our foundation and the people that I run into every day. It's the people I employ as a business owner, as I mentioned before. It will never end. We'll keep on educating, and really that's where I sit. It's not something that where we're heading at the moment within the world. I think it's amazing. We're on an incredible journey. But it's very important to keep on educating.
I was going to say, it's an incredible journey. It's a really bloody slow one, though, isn't it, really? Yeah. I mean, Jill, what do you think about that?
I think we have 50-50 graduates when coming into GHD, and I think it's not that group of people who are feeling disenfranchised, that it's not those males, it's our middle level males who are talking about feeling disenfranchised. And we know we've got some work to do to work with them, to listen to their concerns and to bring them along the journey as well. And I think it comes back again to that education, listening, understanding piece. So what is their perspective? Why are they thinking that? Why are they feeling that way? And what can we do to make them feel included? Because the inclusive piece needs to go across.
It's I suppose also it's sort of a misunderstanding, isn't it, of what's happening. Yes. Another question here, this one again from Michael. What would be your one wish for corporate Australia to do to change the outcomes for Indigenous Australia?
Another good question.
There was one wish.
Just the one. Stories. I talked about mad, bad and sad in your workplace and what you do. And I think the world is getting better at it, but we still have a lot of work to do. But for us and our people, we need more of those great stories. You see the front page of the papers and the first, I guess, headline on the news is a mention about what's happening in our communities and, again, that mad, bad and sad. We need to keep on promoting and providing opportunities. We need to be able to keep on telling great stories to our children and keep on educating the wider community. And I can control what I do right now. Had a wonderful time kicking a footy, but I don't go out into the sunset now and you know, pitch my tent up and say that was great. I'm really proud of myself. I've got to keep pushing. I've got to keep on creating good examples for our communities. And the more stories we tell, the more people know about it. And as I mentioned, like this next couple of days is listening to people, and I mean, listening to Dr. Allen just recently, I was blown away. Absolutely blown away. And I've got a candidate at the foundation for you too, mate. And he wants to be an astrophysicist.
He does.
And he's smart enough to do it. And these are the things I need to keep on promoting and keep on doing. And Adam and I and Shirley and our board will break our back doing it. So that's all we can do. And as I said, we'll till our last breath. That's what we'll do.
There's a great question here, which I think does go to the heart of many of the issues. How can we tap into the value of inclusion when most board vacancies, so we're talking at board level here, most board vacancies aren't advertised and open for any capable person to apply? Now, you know, we talk about the pipeline of people when it comes to getting people into chief executive roles, but I guess in the board realm, it's very similar, isn't it? I mean, who would like to comment on that?
I'll comment on that just because I did the Institute of Company Directors course for 5 days last week. And while I was doing that, I asked myself the question about how many Indigenous Australians could have the opportunity to do the course. And I had a look at what scholarships and the like were available. So I think over time, there will be opportunities for more Indigenous Australians to do that course, to then have the credentials to be able to apply for board positions. I think organisations in the for-purpose sector, but also corporate, will be able to look at their skills base and their stakeholders and their customers and decide whether they do need to have representation from different groups on their board.
There's without doubt, though, an interest amongst Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with significant skills to be on boards and to have some entry-level experience to begin with, so smaller kind of organisations leading up to bigger, meatier roles. There's a lot of interest.
I just want to finish this conversation by asking each of you 2 very quick questions, which are not quick to answer, but I'm going to ask you to try. For everyone in this room to go back to their places of work and 2 things that, one, they should do. So one thing they should do, one thing they shouldn't do. One thing you have seen that is actually a lesson learned and don't go there. So one good thing, one bad thing.
It's too hard. There are so many bad things, it's hard to pick one.
Oh, wow, I didn't think you would say that. Okay.
And look, as I said before, people often just fall over themselves and make mistakes and, you know, trip over just because they're too nervous. They're just afraid of saying and doing the wrong thing, as I said before. I think people, if that, you know, by and large, these are professional people who know what they're doing. And if they were dealing with a different topic, they would deal with it very differently. if they don't know much about it, they'd learn about it, they'd ask questions, they'd surround themselves with people with those skills. You know, they'd apply all of that standard stuff to make informed decisions and have informed discussions. Treat it like anything else. Don't walk on eggshells, don't trip over yourself, surround yourself with good people with good skills and keep moving.
It's all right, you've just answered both. You've done the what to do and what not to do.
Well done.
So mine is very similar. The what not to do is go back and do nothing. You need to do something. You need to be curious. You need to be interested. You need to find out where you can find the level of information that suits where you're at. And in terms of the one thing to do, I think that is use the Reconciliation Action Plan framework to either get more involved in your Reconciliation Action Plan or to see if your organisation has one and get started on one.
Shirley?
What not to do for me is exactly like these guys said, all of our partners that we work with are on different parts of that reconciliation journey. Some are just starting off but have great intentions, and others are really evolved like GHD. It doesn't matter where you are on that continuum, just dive in and start with something. What everybody should do is, it goes back to some of the discussions yesterday, boards have to think long term, and it's not enough. It's very hard to go out today and say, I need 5 Indigenous board members or I need 5 people in upper management, because it's hard to find people. It's hard to find enough people. If everyone went out today and did that, we'd struggle. Everyone has to invest in the future. And so we say to people, if that's your intent, if you want to start hiring more Indigenous people, giving more Indigenous people a voice and a seat at the table, then you have to start investing in the future today. So start at the university level, start at high school level, and start getting out there and talking about what it is you do and how you do it, and tell your story early so that you're building for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, because that's the most important thing we can do.
Michael, one thing to do, one thing not to do.
I think the ladies have answered everything. Probably for me, be courageous. Shelley's already sort of touched on it, but be courageous, ask the questions. We love talking about our culture. We love it. Our culture is your culture. Our country is your country. Be courageous, ask the questions. If you don't know, speak up. And I know it's really difficult to put your hand up and pull someone aside and ask that, but be courageous. There was a stigma about Aboriginal football players who would not be drafted because they would get homesick and go walkabout. That was the consensus from AFL football clubs. Now, the Swans, I like to think, have been at the forefront of breaking that stereotype because they were courageous. They found out for themselves. They went out, they did their homework, and they asked the questions that needed to be answered. And then they got stuck with both Adam and I. But the healthy relationship that we've been able to build with obviously everyone involved and change this football club that was a basket case to help change it along with a lot of others has been a really beneficial one. But they were courageous, they asked the questions, they did their research, they did their homework, and they had a really safe environment for us to go and learn. But yeah, if I leave it with you.
That's a great note to finish on. The challenge has been laid. Be courageous. Please join me in thanking our panel very much, Michael and Shirley and Jill and Sally.